COVID-19 massively affected the Walt Disney World Resort and the Universal Orlando Resort, but which handled it better, and has either resort benefited from the pandemic? This is episode 465 of the Unofficial Universal Orlando podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. It is me, Lee. I'm not here on my own, but I've given Chris and Tracy the week off. But I am joined by some theme park and travel experts to discuss basically how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the two major theme parks in Orlando. Obviously, we steer towards Universal, so I am slightly biased in this discussion. But let me introduce my guests. Of course, this show would not be what it is if it wasn't without our sponsors. And so the mouse from Mouse and Muggle Travel Company is Robin. Hello, Robin.
Hello there. Happy to be here.
Good. It's been a while.
It has too long.
Oh, and you're not supposed to speak yet, so you shush. And our Russia Fear host and my UUOP co-host, I didn't give her the week off, the Muggle from the Mouse and Muggle, and that is Michelle.
Hello. Hello.
Sorry,
I have
Michelle.
been here for a while.
I'm not paying your overtime, by the way, either.
Yes, okay.
And then my theme park expert from the Unofficial Guides and our Little Things contributor, Mr. Seth Kubersky. Hey, Seth.
It is great to actually talk to you instead of just emailing you an MP3.
Yes, it's nice to be able to respond back to you and get a response back rather than just giggling at some of the things you put out there. And of course, making his debut on the podcast from the legendary theme park insider, the person that deemed Mythos the best theme park restaurant 5 years running, Mr. Robert Niles. Hey, Robert.
Hey, it's great to be here. And to be fair, it was the readers. It wasn't just me.
Okay. Yes, it's still the thing of jokes among the Universal Orlando community that I don't even think it's had that vote for a long time at this point. But Seth, would you say it was still the best theme park restaurant?
It actually did. Was it 1 or 2 years ago? It did reclaim the crown, right?
I think it was last year. It did reclaim it.
Yeah, it's Mythos has had its ups and downs, but I really think that when they retired that banner, they should have given it to you instead of selling it off in the prop shop.
I have no place for that. I'm so glad that didn't end up on my doorstep. That was actually one of my fears, was that they were going to send that huge thing to me, and I was like, what am I going to do with this?
So, moving into this, I will give props to the man that suggested it. Listener and friend John Tyler kind of came up with this suggestion in the producer club, and I thought it isn't interesting. Let's, for once, do some actual professional theme park journalism on this podcast, and hence why I'm surrounded by all these wonderful people. But yeah, COVID-19's had a massive impact on the world, but we're here talking about theme parks, and I kind of wanted to have a roundtable discussion with, like I say, some experts on how it has affected those theme parks, whether one's handled it better than the other, how we feel about that, and then moving out of COVID, even though it's still kind of a thing. Well, it is still massively a thing, as we've all had a good laugh before we started recording. Whether either resorts come out benefiting from it, but also what lessons they've learned moving forward, because I think there's a lot of things that they've had to do to cope with COVID that I think make a lot of sense moving forward. So first of all, I just kind of wanted to discuss the handling of the closures of Disney World and Universal Orlando by the companies themselves, and whether you think they both handled it as well as they probably could have done.
I agree that I think the companies handled it about as well as they could have, given that there was no precedent for this in the modern theme park industry. The last pandemic we had like this was 1918, and that was long before Disneyland opened in 1955, long before there were any theme parks in Orlando. So, everyone was kind of winging it, and I think for the most part they did as well as they could. There was one major difference between the two parks, and that was with advance reservations.
Okay.
I think we're seeing the impact of that play out today with the kind of differing crowds that we're seeing at Universal versus Disney. I think Universal has very much become a locals park because you didn't need to make an advance reservation. You could just drop in.
Yeah.
And I think they've taken a lot of market, not from Disney, but from SeaWorld in that way, because SeaWorld was requiring reservations. And, if we want to get into how they handled it, that would not be as best as they could possibly have done. But I think Universal has really become, what SeaWorld was aiming to be a couple years ago before this pandemic, and they've really become the locals park in Orlando.
I think Robert just jumped all the way to our grand finale. I will say the early days just before the shutdown, I was in both Disney World and Universal in the 2 or 3 days before the shutdown. And it was quite eerie, as you could see over the course of about 72 hours, people going from thinking this had nothing to do with them to seeing hand sanitation stations pop up everywhere around the park. And seeing a few people starting to wear masks, to the big announcement that the parks were shutting down. And it did feel surreal. We've had hurricanes that have shut down the parks for a day or two, but nothing on this scale. And I'll give the parks props for the way they handled their guests. People who were stranded here on vacation got taken care of.
Yes.
People who had vacations booked, once they got through the 12-hour lines on hold for guest services, people got their refunds. So the guests were handled well. I think the big differentiation in the way the parks handled the closure was the way they handled their employees.
Right.
Universal kept people on the payroll, getting their benefits, if not their hours, for as long as possible. Whereas Disney was very quick to cut payroll as quickly as possible and furlough people at every opportunity. And I think that helped Universal ramp back up staffing-wise quicker when things started back up. And I think it also engendered a lot more goodwill among Universal employees who, just anecdotally speaking to people who, a lot of people, especially in entertainment, cross between working at both parks. People felt a lot more taken care of by Universal than they did as an employer by Disney.
Yeah. And I mean, so I was going to say, Robin and Michelle, from obviously Seth and Robert have talked from a sort of guest kind of perspective, whereas you guys have had to deal with it on the other hand, booking or dealing with cancellations of bookings. How have you guys found that?
I think the biggest thing for me is with the pandemic, right? We all had no idea what it was, but once the theme parks closed, that's when got real.
Can we say that on this podcast?
Yeah, it'll just get
people
bleeped. It's
it
fine.
for me, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I think it was one of those things. You never see the theme parks close like that. They try not even to close for hurricanes. And if they do, it's a quick closure. Just the fact that things were closing was huge. I mean, even though my kids were home from school, it was worse that the parks were closing. So as a travel agent, it was quite tough. And I believe Michelle will agree, is we didn't have a lot of guidance as far as what to tell our clients.
Right.
So that was very difficult because none of the theme parks didn't know what was going on. So therefore the communication to us was very limited. And then vice versa, we didn't have much to tell our clients, which was very difficult.
It was. And from a travel agent / client perspective, it was not only was it difficult for us to advise our clients, well, should we just rebook for a month away? Should we just, nobody knew what to do, right? We just all kind of did the best we can. But from a travel agent perspective, I believe, and now this was a while ago, this was a year ago now. Can't believe we're still talking about this
Yes.
a year and away. But a year ago, if my memory serves me correctly, as a travel agent, I felt a little bit like the words, the verbiage, everything was a little bit more clear coming from Universal. I felt like they, I don't know if Disney was just trying to hang on to every little, it felt like they had they closed everything in steps and they wouldn't acknowledge that this is a long-term thing, right? So they would okay, if you cancel, they had all these weird terms for cancellations and how they would handle refunds and how they would handle commissions and things like that. It was very hard to keep up with on the Disney side, whereas Universal just kind of made a statement at the beginning and stuck with it. And it was very, very straightforward and clear. from both a guest perspective and a travel agent perspective of how they would handle things. So refunds were really swift with Universal. They took care of their travel agents very well. And the word was just very clear from the get-go. And I feel like that's kind of how it's been. We'll talk about this later, but I feel like that's kind of how it's been with the reopening too. Like, Disney is very phased and very unclear, and Universal just feels like it's very straightforward.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I think as a travel agent, we experience a lot, right, Michelle? In all, true honesty.
Yeah.
It's really tough sometimes to get direct information from Disney until they want to announce it, where Universal is a lot more straightforward.
Yes.
I feel like Universal is a very good friend, where Disney is like a celebrity who doesn't want me to tell anything.
Yeah, Disney's like a club, like a social club, and it's really hard to get information from them, and they really hang on to info as long as they possibly can, to the point that it's ticking everybody off, right?
Absolutely.
From the perspective of someone who's been covering Universal and attraction openings, someone saying that Universal is very forthcoming with information.
Yes, that's very true.
Is absolutely hilarious.
Yes, I thought that.
Because on that side, they're the ones who hold that. We've always joked that Universal will announce the new attraction on its 6th anniversary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Seth, you and I have joked back and forwards about that. Like, what Skull Island? What's that? That thing? No, there's nothing there. No. Ignore that. Yes.
Stand.
Yes.
Stands.
Whereas Disney announces, Avatar like 10 years in advance, right?
I think when you
remember the Rivers of Light, it took 85 years for that to come. Good Lord.
but behind the scenes with the travel agent world, which is a totally different world that you're not privy to unless you're a travel agent, of course. It's a very different beast. Universal does tend to communicate very well with their travel agents. Which makes it a seamless process across the board, and then for our guests, whereas Disney is very cryptic with us.
I will say I get access to both travel agent mass emails and press mass emails, and I often get details on things from the travel agent side before I get it from the media side.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Disney World is a much bigger beast than Universal, so there's always going to be that in there. But it's funny, if you look at the world, I think we've already covered it, the world's dealing with something that they don't know how to deal with now. So I'm sure they were both flying by the seat of the pants trying to deal with it. I mean, it was funny when we were over in February last year. Like, we came the middle of February and everything closed down literally a month later. And yet I remember having discussions with you, Michelle, and Chris, sort of saying, it's just a flu. It'll be fine. Nothing will happen.
Yeah,
it'll just be. Were. And then the next thing, the whole world's closed down and you're like, what the hell's going on?
You're right. That was the middle of February, you said? So just a couple weeks later. Yep.
Like, the world closes down. See you, everyone. We'll see you in 3 months.
Yep.
So, talking about, we kind of tried to get into there, talk about the reopening. I think they both handled it very differently when it came to reopening the parks. Universal, so as far as the closing, Universal and Disney both closed within pretty much the same amount of time. Universal both had their last day of operation on March 15th, and then opening back up, as I say, was handled very differently. Universal began its phased opening on May 14th with parts of City Walk, yet Disney World didn't begin their opening until 6 days later, which isn't that massive of a difference, but again, they went with Disney Springs. But then the theme parks were a very different proposition. Universal opened Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios to all guests, so they did phased open with the team members and pass holders and stuff before that, but to albeit a reduced capacity, on June 5th, whereas Disney World didn't begin their opening of the parks till July 11th, so more than a month later. So discussing the handling of the reopening, I mean, Seth, you and I talked about it on the podcast quite a bit at that point when things started to reopen. How do you think they both handled the reopening, and do you think one resort handled it better than the other? And in which ways did one handle it better than the other, or badly, as it were?
I think better depends on whose perspective you're talking about. If you're talking from a guest perspective, I I think Universal was probably a better experience for most guests overall, because there were just an added layer of hassle at Disney. The Park Pass reservations system, while I understand its purpose in maintaining capacity and spreading it, make sure they can accommodate labor across the 4 parks, it's just, it's another hoop for visitors to jump through. And especially annual pass holders who, kind of built their annual pass holder identity around going to the parks whenever they felt like it.
Yeah.
It was a major, major change to the way people experience the parks. I think it's interesting how Universal kind of tried to get back to the status quo as quickly as possible in as many ways as they could. Whereas I think Disney has taken this as an opportunity to get rid of all sorts of things that it found troublesome. And this was a perfect excuse.
Yes.
Yes.
Fastpass
Nail
is
on
probably
the head.
the best example of that. I think getting rid of Fastpass because of COVID was an amazing opportunity for them, because they've been wanting to find a way to get rid of at least free Fastpass for a long time. So, I think in a lot of ways, Disney has used this whole thing as a way to see how much it can cut back and see how many things it can reduce while still maintaining their price point. Mm-hmm. Whereas Universal, right from the bat, they didn't have to open the Bourne Stuntacular within, weeks of reopening the park. So they could have held off on something that labor intensive. Yeah. But they didn't. They opened that. They opened Velocicoaster, less than a year after reopening the parks. Whereas, Disney has been sitting on attractions like Ratatouille and basically seeing, what is the minimum amount that we can offer that will still keep people coming in.
I think it focuses a lot to, at least from the consumer side, it seems like money is a big factor. So we all know that Walt Disney World has a lot more ventures that were hit huge. They have Disneyland, all of the cruise ships. So I wonder if financially that was a big factor of it, where Universal is smaller. So it did have less losses than Walt Disney World.
Well, I wanted to circle back to something Seth said earlier about keeping the team members engaged on payroll a lot longer than Disney. I mean, that helps you with the ramp up. Yeah. I mean, if you didn't let everyone go, you've got everybody who can get you back up to speed a lot quicker. But I think Seth also absolutely nailed it in the point that this whole experience has exposed that Universal was a lot happier and more satisfied with its status quo coming into this than the Walt Disney World Resort was. And hey, I'm based in Southern California. If you think what they're doing at Walt Disney World is radical, look at what they're doing at Disneyland, where they killed the annual pass program.
Wow.
Granted, that was probably the best move that they could have made coming out of this, because there was no way they were going to be able to accommodate all their annual pass holders. That allows them to reboot the thing. But the fact that Disney had all of these programs that they were marketing heavily, they were leaning into, that weren't sustainable, the fact that they needed something like this to get out of those unsustainable programs just shows you really how their status quo before the pandemic, their standard operating procedures, there were some problems there that needed to be addressed. Now, fortunately, they're addressing them. But it just goes to show, I mean, Universal really kind of had its house in order, and they could get back to that old way of doing things because they were fine with the old way of doing things. It worked.
Yep.
But then off the back of that slightly, I know Chris went, so the parks are pretty much, Seth, you'll know this better than the rest of us, Universal's pretty much back to full operation now. Full capacity, full parks, everything's pretty much open.
So there was kind of like a weird dividing line in the pandemic. The first few months, almost the first 5 or 6 months after the parks reopened, were kind of a paradise. Especially the early weeks in Walt Disney World when it was extremely low capacity. If you managed to get a park pass reservation, it was like being a VIP.
It was.
And then sometime around like the early spring break this year, the dam just kind of broke. Once vaccines started getting more widely distributed, and I guess people just got fed up with staying indoors. and especially Universal. You just saw people come back in droves, and through spring break they still kind of moderated attendance, and they hit capacity some days. By the time we hit Memorial Day, all the it was pretty much just the floodgates open. And I will give props to Disney for one thing. They managed to handle mobile ordering and food and beverage in general far better than Universal has.
They did.
Universal got their attractions up to 100% quicker than Disney, but Universal's food and beverage lagged far behind. I was just there 2 days ago, and they've pretty much gotten rid of mobile order everywhere, and the lines have finally become manageable. You can get a hamburger with a shorter wait than riding the Velocicoaster, which I think, for a while, it took longer to buy a churro at the churro stand near the Velocicoaster than to ride the Velocicoaster.
Yeah, I know.
Which is insanity.
I know a friend of ours that went to try and get one of the new blue churros, and the line was that long, he just gave up.
No.
Well, mobile ordering at Universal was always glitchy, even before the pandemic. So
it was never a well-built system.
No.
And this, the same thing with the virtual line. Disney's virtual line system is pretty awful. But the only thing worse than it was Universal's virtual line system. And they're trying a new test system with Hagrid that I still hear people complaining, but I hear them complaining slightly less. So maybe that's a step in the right direction. Universal's IT department is not nearly as big as Disney's, and it shows. So there are some things that Disney did do a little bit better. But food and beverage was not one of Universal's shining points.
I think one thing that Disney did do better as well, and Seth and Michelle can probably talk about this much more than I, but it did seem as though Walt Disney World made everyone feel equally safe in the beginning of the reopening. So they were stricter with their guidelines as far as masks and distancings and things of that sort. Like me as a germaphobe, I think I felt more comfortable with going to Walt Disney World than Universal.
Interesting.
I actually had a bit of the opposite experience.
Yeah, me too.
Only because
here we go.
And I don't know if that was staff related more so than it was just the makeup of the people in the park, because at Disney you have a lot more small children who don't understand how to follow social distancing rules. And there obviously weren't enough staff positioned within the lines to make sure that people were following them. So when I was in Disney in the end of July, beginning of August last year, and I felt I wasn't ever super afraid of the pandemic, so I wasn't like one that was screaming and causing a scene about people crowding me, but they were crowding me. Whereas Universal, there seemed to be a lot of people in the right places reminding people to keep their masks up or to keep their distance. But there also weren't as many small children around. So I really think that's the big difference. Yeah.
For me, I felt like the policies and the enforcement at both parks were pretty much equivalent. You could have a good day or a bad day at either, but either resort was way better than my local supermarket. But the one thing that I gave the edge to Universal for was that they had mandatory hand sanitizer before you got on every ride.
Right.
Now that you still find hand sanitizer dispensers around the parks, and 9 out of 10 of them are completely empty. So that the parks have kind of even given up on restocking those. But I really liked that. Even it was just a complete placebo. I really liked that little handful of hand sanitizer before getting on every ride at Universal.
I know, kind of going off what I was saying before, I noticed when Chris went down to ride Velocicoaster a couple of weeks ago, he commented on a lot of the hand sanitizer stations being empty.
They've given up on this.
Kind of going back on the staff that we were talking about, Seth, I know he said, because obviously Universal, they did let people go, and now they're trying to ramp back up for full capacity. And I know they've advertised for thousands of summer jobs, and one of the comments that Chris had coming back was he noticed that they obviously haven't ramped up getting the staff back in as quickly as they have getting guests back in, and he did notice a lack of staff in certain places.
It does take time to hire and to train people. You can't just flip a switch. I've known it's also really hard, especially to get people to work in food and beverage, because a lot of people who were working, especially entry-level jobs in food and beverage, they found they liked their lives much better after they lost their job. It's, even $15 an hour is not enough to subject yourself to the kind of abuse that people in hospitality are kind of facing right now.
Yeah.
People are coming back to the parks kind of angry and entitled. The first few months, everyone was so nice. Everyone was just happy to have survived and happy that the park survived, and everyone was so nice. And now we're getting a wave of people who are they're kind of like taking their frustrations from the last 18 months out on frontline employees.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be jumping to work at one of those jobs myself right now. So,
well, and this is a catch-22. Like, guests are grumpy because it takes 2 hours to check in at Cabana Bay.
It's a vicious cycle.
You know, so.
And to me, I think a lot of this comes down to experience, and so much of the experience that was lost when people left, either for furlough or left for other positions someplace. Because I know, having worked in the parks, that there were things I could handle as someone with 2 and 3 years experience that I would have been completely lost in as someone, who had just joined up 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And particularly with this type of entitled, guest coming in at the moment, that's where you really need experienced people who know how to manage those situations and keep them from getting bad. Because if you've got that, then the capacity flows. Everybody's moving, everybody's happy. But when you don't have that type of experience in the cast, in the workforce, in the team, because so many people left or you're ramping back up, you really see it in the operations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one danger zone that I'm keeping my eye on is maintenance. A lot of the parks have, shifted all their labor to first and second shift, and kind of minimized the kind of work that they used to do on third shift. And a lot of the third shift maintenance guys, the blue shirts, those are the guys who really kept these rides, especially older rides, running. The institutional knowledge that it takes to keep a ride that's 20 or 40 or 50 years old operating smoothly, you can't just hire someone new out of college and hand them a manual. And a lot of those guys were approaching retirement age and decided this was the time to check out.
Of course.
And there's, you can't just replace that. And I think compound that with the move of Imagineering from the West Coast to Lake Nona, you're going to have a whole nother wave of, generational institutional knowledge that's going to go into retirement.
Oh, and that's a huge issue for Universal Creative too, because I'm willing to bet you that a very large percentage of the current Imagineers are not going to make that move, which means WDI is going to have a ton of open positions when they get to Lake Nona. And the first people they're going to go after are current Universal Creative people, whether they were laid off from Epic Universe or just recalled. Universal Creative needs to lock down everyone they want working on Epic Universe to 5-year contracts right now, because
they're going to be poaching people left and right. Absolutely.
That's going to be a huge issue for Universal.
Yeah, I have noticed a few of the creative team that got let go being taken back on over the last few weeks, which is interesting, which is good. Because I'd say there was a few surprises of people that did go. I mean, Patrick Braillard's a massive one. When I found out that Patrick had been let go, it was like, what the hell? Like, wow.
Yeah.
Means we could get him on the podcast at that point, so I wasn't complaining too hard, but there you go.
Yeah, I actually did a interview with Jason Sorrell, who left Universal. He's bounced back and forth from Disney Universal many times over there, and he left for, I think it's Storyland.
Storyland Studios.
Yeah.
And I had done a whole interview and was all set to publish when I found out, oh no, he's going back to Universal Creative. Got to spike that interview.
Cool. So another thing, obviously talking about how the theme parks have handled it, especially for me, someone coming outside of the country. I had me and my wife Tracy and our daughter, we had annual passes that still had quite a lot of months left to run on them. So I had seen on a few pass holder groups that Universal were, if you got in touch with them, they would help deal with it. And quite an interesting thing, I got in touch and they basically put a pause on our annual passes, which has actually worked out really well for us because we're going to get 4 trips out of our annual pass that I bought nearly 2 years ago at this point. And I thought that was really good because they didn't have to do that. And I thought it's been that it's those little things that, pardon the pun, Seth, there, those little things that make a massive difference to a guest visiting one resort over the other. Now, I don't know how Disney like how Disney handled that situation? I don't suppose anybody knows what they were doing with sort of out of country annual passes.
They made it so that nobody could buy new passes. Like they are not encouraging annual pass holders in any way at Disney. They are making it so they are bottom of the rung to get park reservations. They're not doing anything extra special for them. They're not. Now, if you have an annual pass, you can renew it, but you cannot buy a new one.
Yeah,
so I don't know what's happening with all of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and even within the United States, I mean, I was in Rhode Island, and when the parks especially Walt Disney World, where I had an annual pass, first opened, it was very difficult for me. You know, there was like certain quarantining I would have to do if I came back, etc. So it just wasn't easily feasible. And Walt Disney World did nothing. They only paused your annual pass when they were closed, but as soon as they reopened, it started ticking.
Okay. It's interesting because, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast a lot recently of how a lot of Disney people have complained that the Disney have just eked away all those little benefits that used to be part of your annual pass, and yet Universal seem to be really ramping up their annual pass benefits. You know, as someone who this is the first time I've had an annual pass when we came over for 2019, and just the little pins they do every month, or the magnets, or a pass holder days, the exclusive things at Voodoo Donut and stuff like that. It's brilliant. Their pass holder program is awesome, and I love what they're doing with it, even though I can't.
Well, and it wasn't just the annual pass benefits that are such a big difference. Just the benefits in general for Disney guests staying on property. Like, there's no benefit at all anymore to stay on property. They took away, other than if you stay at Deluxe soon, you'll be able to actually get in the park earlier. I don't know. It's also weird.
It's all the parks, all the hotels are going to be an hour earlier or half hour earlier every day, all 4 parks. It's the Deluxe hotels who are going to have access to the evening.
Evening hours.
Yes. Okay. But that adding the half hour every morning at all 4 parks basically destroys rope drop for anyone who is not staying.
Yeah. Exactly. That's not a benefit.
It doesn't create a benefit necessarily for it. Just moves the rope drop hour up a half an hour for people staying on site. But because it's spread evenly across all 4 parks, there's no way to get an advantage anymore.
No, there's no benefit. There's no fast passes, so you can't book your fast passes earlier than everybody else. There's
Magical Express is going away.
Magical Express is going away.
Wow.
It's kind of hard to tell.
It's even worse at Disneyland, where I cannot imagine staying at the Paradise Pier Hotel right now, where you're paying like $400 a night for a hotel with no restaurants. Yeah. Where you have to walk further than the distance from the parking garage to get to the park, and that there's no early entry or any other benefits.
Yeah, it's a very hard sell right now, and I really don't understand how Disney's still making money from this and continuing it and thinking this is like the great way to go, because it's a hard sell. I don't know about you, Robin, but I have a hard time selling the properties that I used to be able to sell without trying.
Yeah, for the longest time, it was an easy sell to get someone to stay on site at Walt Disney World versus Universal. It was a little bit more, unless they were going to stay, of course, at a premiere. Yeah. But now, it's hard to sell people on that, but I think it's a whole supply and demand thing. Disney resorts are still selling out. The prices are still through the roof. Where
I don't know how
where Pop used to be.
Possible?
I know. My friend was just there, and I booked a room for her at Pop, which was usually like $95 to $100 a night, maybe $120. It was like $345.
Wow.
Yeah.
$345 for the Pop Century Motel.
Century.
Yes,
exactly. I'm like,
it's Super 8.
As a Universal fan, good.
Yes,
that keeps them away from coming over to my Cabana Bay and bumping up the prices there.
But I don't want to give Universal ideas, because they've really kept Cabana Bay and also Surfside. They've kept those prices. I feel like they're trying to undercut everyone else on iDrive and put a lot of those iDrive hotels out of business, but they're not trying to compete. Like, they're way undercutting Disney on price, and I don't want them to stop.
It's so interesting, though, isn't it? Because you look at, I have no issue with the resorts giving people incentives to stay at those expensive hotels. So you look at Portofino, Royal Pacific, and Hard Rock. The benefit of staying there is huge because you get that unlimited express pass. Like we've done it before. You stay one night, you get 2 days of express. But
usually
then,
it's financially worth it.
It
like
is,
if you're going to get
massively.
express pass, it makes sense.
Yes.
You're getting a free 4-star hotel room, basically.
Yes.
Exactly.
Like
Right?
you could pay $300 a night for a family of 4. Like we'd done it when we had the kids. We stayed at Royal Pacific for one night. We got two full days of express pass for 4 of us for like $300 for the night. And it's like, it's a no-brainer. And Disney, what you're talking about is the benefit of staying at one of their more expensive than Pop Century that's already $300 that Robin's saying, which is ridiculous. And the only benefit you're getting is half an hour's extra magic hour or an hour or whatever it is on there. That to me is not a benefit.
To me,
here's the
Universal
thing.
is behaving like a growing company. They're behaving like a startup that's trying to get market share. There's still that kind of attitude that we have to be aggressive with customer service. We have to undercut people on price. We have to over-deliver on services. Whereas Disney's acting like a very mature company that knows that people are going to show up no matter how much money they charge.
Exactly.
So they don't have to continue providing those same type of benefits. In fact, they can start exploring cutting things back and seeing how far they can cut before they start to lose any market share. And to date, they haven't.
I think if you're thinking in terms of corporate quarterly reports, Disney's making the smart move. This is a uncertain time, and they want to do everything they can to shore up their share price. But if you're looking, 5-10 years down the road, even 20 years down the road, the memories that people make now as kids and teenagers inform the decisions they make when booking vacations for their family a generation from now. And I think a lot of, my generation has very strong attachments to Walt Disney World. And I think that, today's generation of kids are creating those kind of memories at Universal right now.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, is it's not all about those quarterly reports, right? Like you have to also think about customer satisfaction and repeat customers and word of mouth. And that is something that I'm seeing slowing down on my end, is that customer satisfaction portion where people come back from their Disney trips and they're like on this super high where they have to tell everybody how amazing it was, and they have to send their, everybody that they know there. And that's not happening as much. I don't see as many of those happy Facebook posts post trip as I used to. I don't see clients reaching out to me as much to go ahead and rebook as quickly as possible because they might have had like, oh, it was okay, we didn't get to do this, and so-and-so, the cast members seem grumpier than usual. There's no character meet and greets, which was a huge part of the Disney magic. So I feel like the customer satisfaction rating is going down significantly, and that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it, Michelle, is right there. Like as soon as the parks opened, a huge difference we saw from the travel agent perspective and from the consumer's perspective was the missing magic at Walt Disney World. At Walt Disney World, it's not just about the big rides or the latest food or whatever. It's so much about the feeling you get when you walk in and you're in there with all of these people around you and the hustle and bustle, and there's characters, and you can hug Mickey. The fact that I can't hug Mickey still is a real issue for me.
I think one of the big fundamental differences between Disney and Universal has always been that Disney's core product has been escaping the world around you and entering this world of fantasy.
Absolutely.
Whereas Universal was more, here's our kind of sharp, sarcastic look at that world around you.
Yeah.
And that worked in the pandemic because there was no escaping the world around you during the pandemic. You had to deal with all of these safety protocols. But Universal was never about escaping a world. It was about taking, it's like Harry Potter. The Muggles are still there, but you can see them from the perspective of the wizards. So Universal could bring that kind of universal attitude toward this thing that we're now all dealing with, where Disney was like, oh my gosh, we have to acknowledge the outside world right now. What do we do? And then the whole illusion of when magic began to fall
That's
apart for a
very
lot
good
of people.
point. Yeah.
It did.
I think the perfect example of that is the horror makeup show at
Yes.
Universal.
Yes.
The way they adapted that script to PPE, and
Absolutely
it just
brilliant.
shows how talented those
Yes.
performers are, that they managed to make COVID funny.
Yeah.
And contrast that to Disney, that was so steadfast in not acknowledging reality. They wouldn't let their princesses wear any kind of face masks. Like, they could have modeled positive behavior.
Right.
They could have come up with some really beautiful, fashion forward face
And
masks
how many
for the
princess
princesses.
face masks could they have sold?
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
They abandoned a perfect marketing opportunity. And also, like, I don't know, I wonder if the Disney Corporation today was in charge during World War II, if they would have gone along with making the Mickey Mouse gas masks that Walt approved during World War II. I don't know. I don't think they would.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to have
But
to
I
jump.
think that
Sorry,
the
Robin.
characters
Go on.
are such a huge part of Walt Disney World, where at Universal, they're nice to see, but it's not the huge draw.
Yeah.
The
It's not a
characters
draw at all.
are
Yeah.
at Walt Disney World. I mean, it's hard for us to send a client to Walt Disney World for the first time with their little ones when they can't meet the characters. Like, that's tough.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
a tough
even
sell.
aside from meeting the characters, like a big part of the magic at Disney for me was always just that everybody seemed to be happy. Like,
Yeah.
the cast members were very kind, majority of them. And the magic was just there. And since when I attended during COVID, it was like there was none. I met every single cast member I met was like hated being there. Like, they just did not want to be there. They would rather be back home on their unemployment check, and it showed.
Yeah,
So,
Michelle, you've just said
And
it
let's-
again. Like, you visited it during COVID. Like, it's still not like like it's gone, and yeah, it's still there.
Let's not forget that Universal has been working it too. I mean, I think Seth, you mentioned they opened Bourne last summer. Nobody was expecting that to happen. You're opening a stunt show in the middle of the pandemic, but they made it work. There's Velocicoaster. I mean, in our RIA rankings last year, I mean, Islands of Adventure was #1 theme park in the world. That's where they were starting from. And Universal is still improving it. They went ahead and opened new things. Disney just kept delaying all of their openings. So a lot of people just said, forget it. We'll come back when you're doing your big 50th thing starting next year and the 18 months after that, where Universal is constantly improving. So that's someplace I got to go right now. So I think that's part of what's driving the market towards Universal at this particular moment in time.
Right, I'm going to jump in because my bosses are here and I would get my wrist slapped if I didn't do this. So, of course, I have to appease the gods. Let's go and take a quick break to hear from Mouse and Muggle.
Have you taken a stroll down Diagon Alley and visited Gringotts Bank? Taken a ride through New York with Jimmy Fallon? Visited the Truffalo Trees in Seuss Landing or hung out with a real-life Transformer? No? Then what are you waiting for? At Universal Orlando Resort, there truly is an option for everyone. Or if you're leaning a little more towards pixie dust rather than wands and potions, Disney destinations around the globe await your arrival. No matter the adventure, our sponsors have you covered. Be sure to let the experts at Mouse and Muggle Travel Company take care of all your travel needs, earning the distinction of being an earmarked agency specializing in Disney destinations, as well as becoming one of the first to be named a You Preferred agency with Universal Parks and Resorts Vacations. Mouse and Muggle Travel Company will ensure you receive top-rated customer service. Just visit mouseandmuggle.com to fill out a no-obligation quote request, or send your request to info@mouseandmuggle.com. Their team can take care of you no matter where in the world you want to go. With a flick of their wand and a little bit of pixie dust, the process will be so seamless, some might even say it's simply magical.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Robin, Michelle, Seth, and Robert, and we've kind of already got into this a little bit, and this is such an interesting conversation. I definitely want to get back in it. So, we want to move on to the present, and then moving forward, like moving out of the pandemic, which is going to happen at some point. I kind of want to discuss, like I said, we've already kind of discussed it a little bit, that whether the pandemic's helped either resort a little bit, and again, that's kind of subjective. What lessons you think they've both learned from it? that they're potentially going to take into the future, like especially with Universal having Epic Universe being built at the moment, or whether they've learned anything from this, that they go, do you know, we've had to adapt things because of this, and I think moving forward that's something we could potentially put in place. What sort of lessons do you think either have learned from it for moving forward?
Well, I hope the lesson that no one has learned is to put plexiglass into your queues. I never want to see. I felt like a rat in a B.F. Skinner experiment for months, and it was so refreshing going to Disneyland, where in Disneyland apparently they pulled all their plexiglass out as soon as they could. But Disney World, especially, it's been lingering in some of the queues, and it's so unpleasant. So I do hope if there's any change, it will be more research into how to do virtual queues well. I really love the Secret Life of Pets ride that they have out in Hollywood, and they have a clever queue with no switchbacks and no visible handrails, which would work fantastically if it didn't back up, to almost an hour wait because of the merge with Express. But that's a whole nother story. So I hope that they do put more research into how, the next generation of the Jimmy Fallon queue of ways to reduce the amount of time that we stand in crowded indoor spaces with strangers. I think that could always be good.
Just a quick one jumping in there, Seth. Yeah. The locker situation, the Velocicoaster, we've talked about it quite a bit, seems to be amazing. Yes. Do you think that's something they've put in place, was always there, or do you think that's something that's been put in place because of COVID?
Oh, I think that was part of the plan for that coaster from pretty early on. It's not the very first double side. I think they have a similar double side system on a ride in Japan, maybe the flying dinosaur ride out there.
Yeah, I think we talked about there's one at Alton Towers over here that does something very similar.
Yeah. I think especially after they spent all that money relocating the lockers from Harry Potter Forbidden Journey outside, I think they've realized that lockers, especially at Universal, where everything seems to require a locker, is a real frustration. It's a pinch point for guests, and I think they're being proactive about trying to remove those pinch points with or without COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to circle back talking about the idea of virtual queues. I'm a big virtual queue fan in concept, but in practice, it's been terrible because you can get into the math of everything, but basically, if you don't do the system right, you just allow people to clone themselves indefinitely, making the park more and more crowded, as opposed to saying you can only be waiting for one thing at a time. You don't have to wait in the physical line, but you can't go wait for something else.
Yeah.
But I think when we were talking earlier about mobile ordering, that's a really clear example of Disney has created a system that is improving the experience for a lot of people, where Universal's kind of slapdash system made it a lot worse for people. So it shows you that, these type of app-driven enhancements can sometimes be a detriment if you don't do them right. So the lesson is you've really got to invest up front in your IT system, in your testing, in the way you just beat these things before you put them out into the public, and then be able to respond quickly. Because if you do it right, this is going to be a wonderful thing that everybody's going to love. But if you do it wrong, man, you're going to be burning yourself with a lot of the audience.
Yeah, I think if you look at when Volcano Bay opened with the Tapu Tapu, it took a long time for that to get to a point where people were happy with it.
Yeah. I think it would be easier to get a system like that to work in a park designed from the ground up for it. When they're if they're building public spaces, accommodating the idea that people are going to be out wandering around instead of absorbed into indoor queues. Volcano Bay, it kind of works because you've got a lazy river that you can hop into anytime. So a theme park that relies on virtual line has to have its theme park equivalent of a lazy river that you can, attractions that you can walk in and out of freely to balance out the time you spend waiting for your virtual time to arrive.
Yeah.
A for E-tickets were not a bad idea.
Well, listen, MaxPass at Disneyland was fabulous.
MaxPass was awesome. And I wouldn't be sad if they never bring back a free Fastpass, but
Me
they
too.
bring back a paid Max Pass system. I just don't know how I feel about pay per ride.
No,
I'm
no,
willing to pay
oh my
a
goodness.
flat fee per day. But it feels too much like when they put these luxury lanes on the highway, where they change the toll depending on how much the traffic is.
Wow.
That said, I am interested in what they're doing in Paris with that standby pass.
Yeah.
The idea that you will go to a physical queue if it gets up to a certain amount of time. I've heard half an hour, but they can make it anything. And then after that, we're going to go virtual. But you can only do it's not a thing where you can go jump in multiple lines. You only get the one line at a time.
Right.
Yeah.
But that way, if you do if you are stuck in something that's a really long virtual queue, if there are a few things that are just a walk on, you could go do that. That serves the equivalent of that lazy river or the beach that you've got in Volcano Bay.
Yeah.
And you can spend your time with that while you're waiting. So I think what they're doing with Disneyland Paris is something that I hope works out in a way that can be a model for other parks. But looking ahead, what we're talking about, building a new park from ground up, I'm fascinated to see, what they're going to do with Epic Universe.
Definitely.
Because this is their opportunity to get everything right from the get-go.
The key that a system like Max Pass or this standby pass works in a place like Disneyland or Disneyland Paris is that's a well-rounded park that has e-tickets, but it's also got D tickets and C and all the way down to Sleeping Beauty walkthrough. What I'm afraid of is Universal has a habit of building parks full of e-tickets with a very little in the second and third tier.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid the Epic Universe, we're going to have these lands built around these amazing, Rise of the Resistance level blockbusters without the little quiet stuff that you can just, the equivalent of the Tiki Room or the Country Bears that, you can walk in and enjoy with minimal wait.
We're really seeing that in California right now with Universal Studios Hollywood, which has got some great top-tier attractions. It's become a really popular park right now. People are loving Jurassic World and Secret Life of Pets and Harry Potter and all of that. But there is no Tiki Room. There's no Tom Sawyer Island. There's nothing that you can do that takes the pressure off of those big top-line attractions.
Yeah, now that the special effects stage apparently is permanently closed. I was there last weekend, and I had an express pass and only wanted to do 3 things, and it took me almost 4 hours to do 3 things with an express.
With express, oh my goodness!
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. The line, I have never seen a line like the line for Jurassic World. I think it hit like 300 minutes or something insane at some point.
They've got some throughput issues at this point. I mean, it's not staying,
which is amazing.
It's not like Velocicoaster, which is staying up all the time and just eating.
It's amazing because Jurassic World was when it was originally Jurassic Park was built as a people eater, like over 2,500 people an hour theoretical capacity, and the one in Orlando really hardly ever exceeds an hour wait, even on a really hot day.
They're trying to keep it so that the Dominus Rex is working for everyone. For everyone. That's the issue.
I had ridden that when it first reopened with the lame iRex at the end, and I thought it was a good job. Okay, fine, but reriding it with the iRex in full operation, that's stunning. It's just that finale. I want them to bring that here to Orlando because our Jurassic Park ride just looks so sad now.
They've really got to find a way to make it work.
I think that's going to happen because if you look at a lot of the stuff with the Velocicoaster, there's a lot of hints that the Jurassic World makeover is going to expand everywhere. You look at the posters that went out in the tribute stores, a lot of little sort of potential hints to things. I mean, even in the backstory for Velocicoaster, it talks about the Dominus Rex coming to Jurassic Park. So I think it's coming. It's just a matter of when.
Well, yeah, that's the active live IP right now. It's not Jurassic Park. It's Jurassic World. That's what the movies are.
Yeah.
Universal is all about that synergy and promoting their own franchises. I mean, that's why there is let's talk about it, Fast and Furious attraction in Orlando. It's not because they have this great idea for a ride.
Fast and Furious attraction.
I will hold my hands up again and say, I don't mind it.
Lee loves it.
I didn't say I love it. I said I don't mind it.
But if Six Flags Magic Mountain were to sell them West Coast racers and call that Fast and Furious, I think everyone would consider that a win-win.
Yeah.
But anyway, but Universal is all about promoting their franchises. And right now, Jurassic World is the franchise. So I would be shocked, actually, if we didn't see a complete Jurassic World transformation at Islands of Adventure in the next couple of years.
I'm not going to bet against it, but I will say I interviewed Shelby Honia, who's one of the main designers on that ride, and specifically asked about that. And she was pretty insistent that they carefully kind of blended the two franchises and expect it to stay both Jurassic Park and Jurassic World for the foreseeable future.
I'll tell you though,
we'll see how long that lasts though.
I interviewed Terry Koo at the opening of Transformers in Singapore a long time ago, and was asking, are you ever going to bring Transformers to Orlando? He was insistent that we've got Spider-Man. We've already got that ride. There's no way we're ever going to bring Transformers to Orlando, and yada, yada, yada. And there's Transformers in Orlando. So a lot of times they'll tell us we're not going to do this. And
from what I hear, Terry told his bosses that same thing, and they said, no, we have to spend a bunch of excess profits in this fiscal year, so we're building it whether you want to or not. I think that was over his
absolutely
was over his head.
And decisions are made up in Philly.
Going back on to express passes and stuff, it's interesting how you sort of said earlier that Disney have took this opportunity to get rid of Fastpass, free Fastpass. It's like, you look, Universal had, the first time we visited in 2004 and 2005, the same system, and yet they got rid of it years ago, and no one seemed to bat an eyelid about it at all.
I think Disney's lawyers might have batted an eyelid about it. I think that's part of the reason that Universal changed their system, because it was a little too similar to what Disney patented for Fastpass.
Fair enough.
But it's so funny how I read a lot of fan forums and internet groups, and people get really up in arms anytime something happens at Disney that they feel is undemocratic or against Walt's wishes of egalitarianism, however they define them.
Totally what I was going to say.
But they're totally on board with Universal having have and have-nots. And, theme parks are not an unlimited resource. And the only way in our society we've seen of coming up with rationing scarce resources is by charging more money for them. I very much believe that when everyone is special, no one is special. When everyone has Fastpass, no one has a Fastpass.
The math doesn't work on Fastpass. That's why it was becoming... exactly. The point there is that when Fastpass first came out, and there was an enormous amount of public ignorance about the system, and a few people who studied up and learned how to game the system could take huge advantage at the expense of the experience of people who didn't know any
Some of
better.
us even managed to have careers writing books.
Absolutely. I got a lot of traffic over the years telling people how to use Fastpass, but the trouble is, Seth, you and I and a whole bunch of other people were way too effective in educating the public about this. And now everybody knows how to run the system. And as you just said, if everyone knows how to game the system, no one can.
Well, and that was one of the perks of being
the entire thing.
That was one of the perks of working with a travel agent too.
That's what I was going to ask next, actually. Robin and Michelle, you come at it from a different point of view of now people are starting to book trips to Universal and Disney. Has anything changed that you feel has been changed because of COVID as far as booking trips for your clients?
I do feel I've gotten asked the question more often than before of what exactly is me booking with you going to do for me? Nobody ever questioned that before because Disney was very overwhelming. And now that Disney does not have all of those overwhelming aspects, they don't quite understand why they can't just do it on their own. So yes, it has affected.
And just like everyone else on this call, maybe outside of Lee, we could do fast passes in our sleep. So that was a service that we provided to our clients where we could get you in for everything. We knew how to do it, when to do it, etc. But I feel that, Seth, with what would Walt think about this? And I think Walt wanted everyone to be equal at Walt Disney World. That was part of the perk of it. Whether you were staying at Pop or the Grand Floridian, once you were in there, you were on the same level. So I have a really hard time with them stating that they're going to charge, where you can get, the rumors, should I say, that they could possibly be charging for fast passes or certain level, get fast passes. I don't love that idea. I love the fast passes, and I have personally many clients who are some of my higher end clients who are like, I'm not going back until I have fast passes. They want that more of a VIP style. They want, and some of them did stay at Deluxe and purchase additional fast passes. So they had 6 throughout the day. It was a different experience. So.
Well, and that's exactly why I liked Max Pass so much more than I liked Fast Pass at Disneyland, because there it really does even the playing field. It doesn't matter where you're staying, except for the fact that you get into the park earlier. Therefore, you get earlier access or quicker access to the rides when they do open the window for the Max Pass. But, for $15 per person extra, you get to utilize the Max Pass system on your phone as opposed to having to go to stations. And it worked beautifully, because it didn't matter if I was staying at, the Disney hotel or not. When we all got in the park, we had equal access, and it wasn't just one per ride. I mean, one per, you could only be in one thing. Every hour you could make another one. So it was a beautiful system. It made my day at Disneyland seamless and stress-free. It was beautiful. And I so wish they would bring that to Disney World, because it makes sense. There is an upcharge, but it's still a similar system, and it levels the playing field. I think it's great.
It's a minimal upcharge. I think $15 a person is, totally doable.
Yeah.
But I do think they got to do something. They have to do something for getting into lines. No one wants to wait in those lines that we did, in the 1990s.
Well, and now that the parks are open and, everybody, the capacity's up, like, you need to make a decision soon, because you're making your experience there very miserable.
Well, I will say that from what I've seen, if anything, they are taking fast pass signs down from entrances around the parks. So whatever comes back probably won't be called fast pass.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Which is funny, because every product in the world at every other park gets called Fast Pass.
Yes, you're right. It does. Yeah. Everybody
we'll be calling
calls
it Fast Pass longer than people are still calling it Disney MGM Studios.
I just really hope that they do something, and they do something really magical, because we need that.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's time for Disney to have that magic for the consumer.
I think the next generation, the hints that we've seen from Disney Genie, is that you will have something that very much, takes on the touring plans concept that my Unofficial Guides kind of pioneered. Yeah. And basically, you'll tell Disney what kind of things you're interested in, but not specifically what rides. And Disney will spit back an itinerary for you. And as long as you stick to their times, you will experience minimal waits. But if you try to freelance, you're going to find a lot of longer standby lines.
It's difficult, though, isn't it, to do something like that? I know we've looked at touring plans before, and we've seen people in the parks with them, and it's like, yes, you spend all this money to go to these theme parks, and you want to try and experience as much of it as you possibly can. But we all know on here, a lot of going to somewhere like Walt Disney World or Universal is stumbling across those things that weren't necessarily planned in your day. Yeah. Those little character interactions, or a cast member interaction, or an interaction with a team member, or just something random that happens during the day that you cannot plan for. And then the problem is that when those things happen, it throws everything else out, and it just it's difficult to find that happy medium.
The problem is, I agree with you 1,000%, but the problem is you can't plan for it, and you also can't quantify it on a survey and see what it contributes to the bottom line.
Okay.
And when they conduct surveys, guests' satisfaction is tightly correlated to the number of attractions that they get to see during a day. Someone who only gets on 8 rides is a lot less likely to be happy and satisfied as a customer than someone who gets on 9 or 10 or 11 rides in a day.
Which is so interesting, because from my perspective, and my mantra as a travel agent for the past 8+ years has been, we do not overplan when you plan with me.
I agree 100%.
And my clients come back happy, even if they didn't ride all the rides. They're like, oh my gosh, Yeah.
None of us are average. I mean, none of us. Only one person gets to sit on top of the bell curve.
Yeah.
And for many of us, it's like, I don't care what park it is. There's going to be some wildly popular E ticket you hate, and there's going to be some completely ignored B ticket that you fall in love with.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the way it is for everyone. And until you know what E ticket it is you want to skip and what B ticket it is you want to discover, and if you're just sticking with the automated plan through Genie, Disney Genie or anything else, you're not going to have that serendipitous experience that you would have had the whole park been manageable from its design in the beginning.
And especially when you're dealing with young children, which especially at Walt Disney World you are, you'll find that I remember the first time I took my daughter, she was almost a year, and I was so excited to bring her with my parents on like my favorite rides. It's a Small World and the Carousel and all of those things. And she just wanted to meet random characters that she didn't even know. And I was flabbergasted. I'm like, but no, we're trying to get to a ride. And she was crying because, she wanted to meet this character that she didn't even know. But I had to recenter myself. That's not what it's about.
And that's
we'll
so
get there.
weird because when we took ours for the first time, Jade was 5 and she was all about the rides. I remember specifically being sat on Splash Mountain halfway through it, and she's already asking, what we doing next? And it's like, we haven't even got off this yet.
Yeah, but I think to plan ahead, most of my clients do not want that step-by-step guide. I do have some who sometimes want a minute by minute, including bathroom breaks.
See, that's hard.
But then I will say the majority of them are even a little frustrated with their dining reservation and their 3 fast passes. So 4 things that you have to do through the whole day. And they're kind of not happy about that.
Which is the beauty and one of the biggest selling points for Universal, right? Because we're Mouse and Muggle. Those are our 2 things that we focus on. And that's our biggest request. Universal is so much easier to sell because it is all about flexibility, especially when you stay at those premier resorts. It's all about flexibility. I have a hard time convincing my Disney clients who are going to Universal for the first time that they don't have to plan. It's okay. I promise it's okay that you don't know what ride that you're doing in the first hour. It's okay. Or
where you're going to eat. What do you mean?
They're like, what? It doesn't make sense. And Disney feels like they're going in the opposite direction. Like this flexibility idea works so beautifully at Universal. And Disney is trying to tell us what to do every second of the day in the direction that they're going. I'm not happy.
What do you mean you don't know what you're going to do? First thing you're going to do at Universal is you're going to go ride Hagrid's, and then you're going to go eat at Mythos because it's the best restaurant.
Well, when you got a 10-year-old that won't ride Hagrid's, it really is about hey, what are we going to do first? And we just go, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about when we came over for the Weekender in 2019. I'll be honest, we barely rode anything at Universal for an entire week, and yet I'll still state the best week of my life.
Yeah.
But then I suppose, again, it depends what perspective you're coming at things from.
Again, as Robert said, we are all exceptional. And we are people who go to theme parks as a regular part of our lives. You've got to look at it from the perspective of, Orlando is people who are making a visit an average of maybe once every 5 years or once every 10 years.
Yeah.
So, there's a fear, FOMO. People invest a lot of money in a vacation. Americans get less vacation time than anyone else in the world. And a lot of, there are people who just want to relax and not worry about it, but there are also people who are very concerned about getting the value for that insanely high ticket price that they're paying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Right. Has anyone got any last thoughts to wrap this up?
So where do we think it's going to go from here?
I don't know. I can't even get over there yet. That's what's killing me. It's interesting, isn't it? It definitely seems from the perspective of someone who does a Universal podcast, talking to our listeners who go fairly regularly, that definitely Universal seem to be coming out of it the better. Customer service seems to be better than Disney. The whole experience just seems to be easier and better. And a lot of people, I mean, Michelle, you and I have talked about it. A lot of people who were staunch Disney fans have tried Universal and are now moving over to that side.
Yeah, they find it hard to go back to the planning that is required with Disney after experiencing the flexibility of Universal. So
I think the ultimate sort of test of how much this has changed things, I think we've already kind of broached it, is Epic Universe. The lessons they've learned from this you will probably see implemented the most in Epic Universe, and it certainly won't have done that park any harm whatsoever to look at what's gone on and then somehow try and build that into the new park.
That's going to be a fascinating story to be told
It really
someday.
is, yes.
Once Universal is willing to tell it about just how much this whole experience is changing what Universal wanted to do and ultimately will do with Epic Universe, which I think is an opportunity for Universal really to create the model of what a theme park is going to be for the 21st century.
I mean, it's interesting to look at Epic Universe from a point of view. I mean, we've spoke to people. I had a conversation with Mike Aiello about it, and he told me that Epic Universe will be unlike any theme park you've seen before. And to try and get your head round something that's how can it be different? Like, it's got to have a certain structure. How is it going to be that much different? And it's going to be really interesting to see that park come together and see what he means by that statement.
Yes.
Right. Well, and with Disney too, because I don't want to bash on Disney. I love Disney. I'm not super happy with how they've handled this whole situation, and I'm definitely not super happy with it's very obvious lately that the bottom dollar is their biggest motivator, with taking so much away and not having any word about what they're replacing it with. And Robin, you and I have talked about this throughout the pandemic too, is Disney had a habit of taking something away and leaving it at that, which upsets everybody, right? Like, no more dining plans. Okay, what does that mean? Like, does that mean that you're revamping the system? You're coming back with something better? Nope, we're just taking them away. Same with Magical Express, taking them away. Same with Fastpass. Like, everything's just going away. Prices are going up, and they have given us no information about what we have to look forward to. And that's something it drives me nuts, because that's not how you deliver bad news, right?
Right.
Like, you're like, okay, we're taking fast passes away, but don't worry, something better's coming.
Yeah.
That one simple statement would ease everybody, and they haven't done that. So with this 50th anniversary, they have a lot of cryptic promises that this is going to be an amazing year, right? They haven't really told us too much other than, fireworks are coming back. The decorations are beautiful. I hope with this 50th anniversary coming up in a few months that we start seeing some of these benefits and some of these great things that came along with the Disney vacation. I hope we see them coming back soon, because right now, with them taking so much away and increasing their prices at the same time, does not sit well with me or with tons of people.
Right. With a lot of our clients, it's tough.
Yeah. Although people are still paying it.
Supply and demand.
So it's not... It is teaching Disney that they can do it, right?
Yes,
it's teaching Disney that, hey, we can take stuff away and people are still coming. And that, I mean, yes, that's the nature of the beast, but I hope that they don't lose sight of what their product was.
Yes, definitely.
And their product was built on magic and fantasy and creating this experience. And I hope they get back to that soon. So
I agree, 110%.
Cool.
Guess we'll find out October.
Yep.
Yeah.
More to come.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. This has been a really interesting episode. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting into, as I say, some proper theme park journalism, which we don't do on here a lot, but there you go. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed it. Again, Robert, would you like to plug and let everyone know where they can find your site and everything that goes on at Theme Park Insider?
Yeah, it's themeparkinsider.com. We're also on YouTube at Theme Park Insider, Theme Park on Twitter, Theme Park Insider on Facebook. Lots of fun stuff coming up in the months ahead. So come check it out. We'd love to have you over on our place.
Definitely. Awesome. And Seth, everyone hears where you're from at this point. You might as well go and plug it again.
Absolutely. You can find me at theunofficialguides.com, on Twitter at the UG Series, and on Instagram at the Unofficial Guides.
I still like that it's all nice and neat now, where it used to be every other week on little things. It got longer and longer of all the things.
Oh my God. I'm trying to cut back. I'm trying to cut back.
Robin, Michelle, I've already plugged it, but go on, plug it again.
Yeah, so if you guys want to plan a magical trip, we promise to do our best to make it as magical as possible with all the craziness going on in the world right now. But just find us at mouseandmuggle.com. That's all spelled out. You can do a quote request there. Super easy. We are also on Instagram at mouseandmuggle.com, or not .com, but mouse and muggle. But our Facebook, our website is the best place to find us.
Wow, Michelle.
There you go, Michelle.
Sorry, I have a dog in front of me that's distracting me.
And
don't bark, please.
These guys
bark.
have been our sponsors for how long now? 4 or 5 years, and it's been amazing. And having used you guys to book stuff, I will quite happily plug you. And awesome. Cool. Right. That's going to wrap up this episode. Of course, we will end, as we always do, with the Universal Is, and I have asked Robert to be the participant for this week's. But of course, if you want to get involved, all you've got to do is let us know what you think Universal is in 3 words or less, and you can send them to us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or podcast@uopodcast.com. Tracy's not here. I will say carry a pigeon, as she always says. But we are going to wrap this up. And Robert, it is over to you.
Going with what my readers say, the world's best.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Guess that wraps things up for another unofficial Universal Orlando podcast. You guys did all right. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Pinterest, keyword UUO Podcast. Listen and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or anywhere podcasts are found. You can find our blog at UUOpodcast.com. Send us your spews, which Lou gets your poo recordings, questions, or comments to podcast@UUOpodcast.com. Check out our friends, the Theme Park Duo, and our awesome sponsors, Mouse and Muggle Travel Company. So, until next time, don't give up your day job. Say cheese. See you later.